For more on the national security situation between the U.S. and Iran, we want to bring in former Israeli Air Force pilot Tal Keinan. He's chairman of Clarity Capital and author of God is in the Crowd. And we're also joined by retired Marine Corps Gunnery Sergeant Jessie Jane Duff. She is also a senior fellow at the London Center for Policy Research. We thank you both so much for joining us. Tal, let me begin with you very quickly. With this last-minute reversal on these strikes, what kind of message do you think that it sends to Iran that the president decided to cancel this at the last moment?
So I think it's actually a good message, and that Donald Trump's style actually is serving the United States' interests in this particular case. The Iranians are trying to set a Goldilocks temperature for tensions with the United States, right? They want just enough to roil financial markets, which will put pressure on the Trump administration, not enough to incur a serious U.S. military strike. It's a very difficult game to play, obviously. By not setting clear lines, without setting ultimatums, I think the Trump administration is making that very difficult for the Iranians. Now, to be clear, we're still in a game of brinksmanship, and I don't think it's anywhere near over. But that's the Iranian challenge, I think, and I think the Trump administration has actually addressed it pretty effectively.
Jessie Jane, your thoughts. The president said we were cocked and loaded to strike Iran, but then he decided to call it off because the plan, as it was presented to him by military leaders, was not proportionate. Now Iran might know that the United States seeks proportions in confrontation. What do you think about the decision to call it off, and also the decision to reveal the thought process behind it?
Well, I think the president has also proven that his thought process can change at any given moment. He is making a strategic decision based upon the knowledge he has at that time. If the Iranians want to keep playing this game of chicken, trying to taunt the United States, they're going to be on the losing end. That is also the message that the president gave. Yes, he was ready to strike, and he decided not to. That doesn't mean the next time they're going to be so lucky. What it also reveals is that the left has been attacking President Trump for dragging the United States into another war. He demonstrated to the Americans here in the United States that he is not doing that, exactly by taking this measured presence that he took against the Iranian people, yet deciding strategically not to have a death toll that would be slapped in his face. Any war with Iran would be called the Trump war, and he's quite aware of that. If there's any indication he wants to run for re-election, he wants to do what's in the best interests of the United States.
Tal, what do you make of the Iranian response afterwards, their announcement, their claim that they could have targeted a U.S. plane that was flying in the vicinity of the drone that they knocked out of the sky? Was this their way of showing that they exercised restraint, or was this their way of showing President Trump and the world that they have the tech to do much worse?
I think it's much more the second. I mean, the Iranians are, again, trying to test the limits of the Trump administration here. They want a reaction, to be clear. You know, oil prices have come up a bit over the last few days. Equity markets aren't feeling this at all. The Iranians are keenly aware of Donald Trump's position in the election cycle. This is not a time that the Trump administration, I would say the global economy as well, but certainly the Trump administration can afford a recession or some calamitous market event. Mm-hmm. And clearly we are, I mean, this is probably the most loaded region in the world for a miscalculation that would.
And we'll continue to discuss it. Tal Keinan and Gunnery Sergeant Jessie Jane Duff, stick right here. We'll talk much more. To discuss, let's bring back former Israeli Air Force pilot Tal Keinan. He's the chairman of Clarity Capital and author of God is in the Crowd. We're also joined by retired Marine Corps Gunnery Sergeant Jessie Jane Duff. She's also a senior fellow at the London Center for Policy Research. Tal, we're trying to think what kind of strategy on Iran could come out of this security summit in Jerusalem next week. And a couple of weeks ago, there was an interesting report which claimed that the United States and Israel, as part of their efforts to counter Iran, might offer Russia some sort of a deal in which they will legitimize the Assad regime in Syria in return for Iran's exit from the country. Do you think it's realistic? Do you think this could really happen?
I think it makes a lot of sense. I mean, the Russians wanted their Mediterranean port. That's really what they're doing in Syria. The Iranian forces in Syria were helping the Russians in the first part of the war. Now they've become a hindrance. They can only bring instability. They bring the IDF into Syria. That's not great for the Russians. So I think that is actually a possibility, and it increases the pressure on Iran. I think what we're saying, it's not a matter of them being emboldened by the administration's restraint. They almost have to escalate. And I would say that the next place where they would naturally escalate is actually in Lebanon or Syria, not in the Gulf.
Jessie Jane, let's bring you in here because one of the points that we've been talking about is Iran and its nuclear ambitions here. Russian President Vladimir Putin has said very clearly he does not think that Iran is in violation of the nuclear deal and that the application of sanctions against it by the U.S. are not justified. So that in mind, I mean, what can we really expect realistically to come out of this summit?
I don't expect much from Russia myself. Personally, Bashar al-Assad in Syria is in bed with Iran and Russia. He has to depend upon the Iranians because of the Shia support that he needs. He is basically trying to eradicate most of these Sunnis, including that of ISIS. But make no mistake, Bashar al-Assad is the one that has given the green light to Iran to be in there. And until he turns around and tells them to leave, I don't see them leaving. I don't think the Russians are good. We all know that the Russians will not lose access to their port. So yes, this is all up in the air to wait to see, not to disagree with anybody, but there are other avenues that we have to explore, including that the influence of Bashar al-Assad. You know, we know that Putin is not on the side of the United States. He is also somebody that was part of the Soviet bloc, and world domination is the nature of his blood. It has run through his veins through his entire life. He will not be giving that up easily.
All right, Jessie Jane Duff and Tal Keinan, Gunnery Sergeant Jessie Jane Duff, thank you so much for being here, both of you.